I am happy to be joined with the CEO of Havn Life Science, Mr. Tim Moore. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Shad. How are you today?
Good. Obviously an interesting week. Elections still looming, so to speak, but I just can't believe all the news, obviously tailored around the cannabis industry, and most importantly, something that you focus on is the psychedelic industry. But big news, obviously, out of Oregon and in Washington. What was your reaction when you heard the news come late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning?
Frankly, with Oregon, I wasn't surprised. I mean, they were early adopters on cannabis legalization, so it was. I think that it was a logical thing to happen, and public sentiment around psychedelics has been evolving. So I thought it was just a logical next step. We saw Denver and a couple other cities last year come through with the same type of rules. So I think, the early adopters are the early adopters, and Oregon has proven that they're one of those.
So let's talk about the announcements. So voters both in Oregon and Washington, D.C. voted to decriminalize the possession of psychedelics. So what should people make out of all this?
I think we need to look at it with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that suddenly you're going to see this massive uptick for the psychedelics industry.
Okay.
You still have the laws in place that exist today on a federal level. So a company here in Canada that say we had psilocybin ready to ship today, you can't ship it to Oregon. You can't get it over the border.
Right.
So it's an opportunity for the people in Washington, D.C. or in Oregon, where there's local growers and local producers, to cultivate and build that business locally, much like cannabis grew up in the U.S. within state boundaries. But I think for the industry, what it really is an important indication of where public policy is evolving and
right.
how things are going to move. It doesn't make a big difference to our business today, but it does set a pace for the timetable for evolving rules around the use of psychedelics, and importantly, psychedelics for medical use, not for recreational
right.
use. I think that we won't see federally legal recreational psychedelics possibly ever. But we will see the FDA and Health Canada approve these medications for use for anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. We will see that.
So, like the war on drugs in America, we don't need any introduction. People are obviously well rehearsed with that. So, based on these changes alone, how much should people, I guess, read into this as far as the states? The ease of it all between the federal and the state lawmakers. And as you said, you're not going to see a lot of change today, but how much do you think this will be a domino effect across multiple states as time goes on?
I think it will be exactly that. I think you'll see, other states that followed Colorado and Oregon with legalization of cannabis will be the same ones that'll start to follow, and you'll have states that'll be the laggards, the Michigans and New Jerseys and Arizonas that came late into the cannabis space will be probably late into this. But it will be that distinction between allowing people legal access for medical treatment
right.
versus recreational. And I think that's where we need to keep our eyes focused is this is for the treatment of mental illness along with other therapies. And it's exciting that public policy is evolving like that. And I think that, we're a few years away from seeing this evolve. The science is still going to drive this. You have to come up with the appropriate dosage and protocols around the treatment in order for the FDA and Health Canada to approve these new compounds and new treatments. So that work is still ongoing, and that's where Havn Life is participating as a supplier to the researchers in that
right.
space. But we can once we have our dealer's license, we can legally ship product to anyone else that's properly licensed under the FDA or Health Canada. And that hasn't changed with the decision in Oregon this week. It's the same rules will apply for people to ship product around.
Walk me through, you're a CEO of a company and this is what you do. And this is the people that you're obviously speaking with on a day-to-day basis. But is it realistic to think in due time from a medical perspective that this will be legalized federally in what you believe in across the US and Canada?
I do. And you keep in mind what that really means, though. So take any pharmaceutical drug. If GlaxoSmithKline or Pfizer is creating a new drug for heart disease,
okay,
they can't legally sell it until the FDA approves it for pharmaceutical use with lines around here are the claims that you can make, here are the precautionary statements, all of those things that have to go around it. But before that happens, that's not a legal compound.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same place that psilocybin is today. It's not a legal compound to be administered to people as a drug. And with the few exceptions in Canada here, we've had 4 people granted Section 56 exemptions for end-of-life anxiety.
Right.
So they're the exceptions. And I think that that's where we're going to see more progression, that as public sentiment around this grows, you're going to see more and more people and identifiable groups get exemptions. So an identifiable group would be, for example, veterans that have high incidence of mental health issues, and they're not responding to traditional methods. We may see them as one of the first groups to get approved federally to get access to and potentially even get funding for the use of psychedelics for these treatments. So there's a lot of research taking place in that space as well.
Do you find a lot of the policymakers are becoming more and more receptive every day? Because on paper and what you read, it appears. But again, like, what are some of the things that you hear that maybe the average investor or consumer doesn't get a chance to have access to?
Well, what we hear is that there's more and more of these studies being fielded by high-profile entities. So
right.
Things like the U.S. Army just fielded a 4-year study. So that's a big deal. I mean, there's nothing more public in the U.S. than the military, and they have just funded a study for 4 years on PTSD being treated with psilocybin. So obviously, the public policy people can't ignore those things. They can't ignore NYU, the U of T, Johns Hopkins, King's College, all these places that are doing psychedelic studies and are coming up with methodologies that will eventually lead to an approved pharmaceutical.
Makes sense. From a business standpoint, if I'm an investor, companies like, yourself and other players within the space, we're watching all this transpire. What do you think this means for them? I guess, you kind of outlined, short term, I don't know if there's going to be anything to really grow on all that fast, but over time, obviously this has an impact with what was voted on earlier this week. So again, if I'm an investor, what does this all mean for me right away?
I think what the investor can look at is that this is legitimate business. You're seeing public policymakers come on board with the supporting of the use of it. That there is merit to the industry, even in its early days, because we are still in very early days. I would say that psychedelics are today where cannabis was 8 years ago, where it's that far along. So yeah, we're going to see momentum grow. We're going to see policymakers in different jurisdictions that make decisions, and we're going to see more and more companies participating in the research. And it's there's so many different mental health issues to be treated. This is not about a one and done. We're not going to just suddenly have one solution here that's going to fit everybody's situation. I think we're going to see over the course of time multiple treatment regimens, as well as multiple facilitation of that treatment through psychotherapy, counseling, coping mechanisms, and everything else that has to go in the treatment of mental health. So back to what does it mean for investors? We've got a real business in front of us.
Right.
As an industry, there's a real business emerging. And it's picking the people that have a good business plan and a path to revenue, that have the discipline around how they conduct their research, and have the right operators on hand to keep the business upside on cash flow and the P&L. Makes
sense. You said earlier that you weren't surprised with the outcome and how people voted for this in both Washington, D.C. and Oregon, excuse me. What was your reaction when you saw the overwhelming amount of support, as much as 75% in Washington, D.C.? These were incredible numbers that, can't go unnoticed. There's a tremendous amount of support. So as much as I don't want to fast forward to another election in 4 years, because there's been so much going on this week, where are we, you think, in the next election? Is this going to be a domino effect across the U.S., you think?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. That the reason you're seeing those big numbers is people are just tired of the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Right? Because the war on drugs is really a war on the person at the end of the line, because what it's done is it's, subverted the access to safe product. You end up with fentanyl on the street and all of the different issues that's a consequence of the war on drugs.
For sure.
And, people are just tired of the amount of money that's gone into it, the number of people have been incarcerated. So the public policy is really, and public opinion has really evolved significantly over the last decade, particularly when it comes to a medication that can treat mental health. You know, we've talked about this before, you and I, that mental health has come out of the dark. It's now something that people can talk about. And we're seeing that in these election results, that people recognize that mental health is a large and growing issue, and anything that could offer people hope for better life is going to get interest.
Is it a generational movement, you think, as far as, you know, the industry itself? Like when one door closes, another door opens, and maybe people for younger generations look at things differently or dealt with different things than, say, older generations. Would you read much into that, or is this just where we are today in society?
Yeah, I think it's where we are today. I haven't really given much thought to it being a generational thing. I don't know that I think about it differently than my adult sons.
Right.
I think we probably are like-minded on it. So yeah, I don't know that it's generational.
Makes sense. Listen, I appreciate your time. Let's keep in touch, and obviously a lot going on with the industry, and we'll have you back on again soon.
Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon. Take care. Bye.